All right. Is anyone actually there besides Joe and Sutton?
No, we're just going to hackle from the sidelines if you're cool with that.
I mean, I would hang out with the two of you, just like, oh, I hear.
We have a few people. Sorry, Karen, just interrupting you.
Well, I know you. I'm used to it.
So from a technical aspect, we're all ready to go.
Cool. Let's get started then. There's no need to stand on ceremony.
Do we have a way of people? Obviously, the people can watch on YouTube. Are we taking any questions via IRC on this, or is it all being done through?
We are taking questions from anywhere.
Okay.
Super channel.
Greg Barnett's in the Wikimedia Office channel on IRC, and I'm responsible.
Cool.
So
yeah,
I'm monitoring in Wikimedia Office, so folks are in there. I'm also monitoring in the Etherpad, if you would like to send there, and I'm keeping an eye on the the Blue Jeans. That was a marketing miss. The Blue Jeans chat as well, and I will be able to ping Zach, who is sort of officially moderating from the room, if anything comes up.
Excellent, thank you. You know, Sutton, and Joe Sutherland, I actually didn't really realize that your names are both Joe until just now. What?
You totally missed our little. Hey Joe, how are you, Joe? I'm cool, Joe. How are you, Joe? You missed.
It wasn't until Karen pointed it out in the chat.
So instead of trying to join the committee of James, you should perhaps form a committee of Joe, yes?
Yeah.
The Joes start a war.
Oh, that would be.
I feel like this wouldn't end well.
I think
we should have like a Wiki Dojo battle between the Jameses and the Joes.
That would be pretty amazing. I'd pay to watch that.
Because you know, dominate the Wiki Dojo. Come on, the Great Cabal. Think of it.
This does actually feel kind of like a video chat IRC room, I'm not going to lie, just chatting about Wiki Dojo and stuff. But I do want to make sure that if there are folks there who have questions, that they feel as though they can also ask those questions. Welcome, and thank you for joining if you're there, whether in Blue Jeans or elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the format we have for this is essentially that this is open time to ask questions. The best place to queue a question is in the Etherpad, but honestly, you can put them anywhere and we will stack them for Catherine to answer. I'll just be moderating for time and making sure that we're taking questions as they come up from as many channels and places as possible. We have the full hour. Many of you, I think we already know, but if there's anyone who wants to say hi and explain their question or say more, also let us know that. So I think, Catherine, you can probably just give us your thoughts at the present moment while we start to collect questions.
Sure. Thoughts about, so I think that one of the things, and I think a lot of the foundation staff have had the chance to hear this before, but one of the things that we've really been focused on is managing the transition itself from the previous leadership and being prepared, getting set and ready to go for the future at the foundation. And it's a little internally focused in terms of the conversation around those transitional priorities, but essentially we set out 5, and I presented about them at metrics in the past, and I presented an update in this past metric if anyone is interested and would like to go take a look. But essentially those 5 priorities were recruiting the permanent executive director, recruiting for key executive hires, finalizing the annual plan, finalizing the strategy, and addressing some of the key engagement survey issues that were raised back in November. And I'll just walk through these really quickly, and if folks have questions, they can ask. for folks who've heard this already, my apologies. But what they say is that you have to hear it 7 times, I think, before it starts to really sink in. So with regards to the permanent executive director, as folks know, we have set up a permanent search committee that has 6 members on it, 4 board members and 2 members of the staff. The 4 board members are Kelly Battles, Guy Kawasaki, Alice, and Dariush. And the 2 members of staff are Lisa Gruhl, who is our Chief Advancement Officer, and Katie Horn, who's the Director of the fundraising team and the product team. Katie was selected by the staff themselves in essentially a voting process. And so those 6 individuals have set up the steering committee, and they've identified an external search firm called Viewcrest Advisors. They're working on setting up a job description and continuing to do consultation sort of on what that job description should look like. Once we've got a job description, they'll share that with the community for further feedback and refinement. So that's sort of where the process is right now, is in between establishing the search committee, identifying the firm who they'll be working with on the executive search, and then not quite yet at the place of having a formal job description. The progress is being made. I know that they're looking at trying to target September as sort of a date in which they've got a final candidate, and I believe have made an offer. So that's number 1. And then number 2 was the recruiting of key executive vacancies. And what we're doing right now is we've got 3 open positions within the organization: the Chief Technology Officer, the Vice President for Talent and Culture, and the Chief of Community Engagement. We actually have interim leadership in all 3 of those positions. We have Wes Moran acting as the CTO, we have Jody Laura acting as the Vice President for Talent and Culture, and we have Maggie Dennis, who is acting Chief of Community Engagement. They're all doing a fantastic job. I love working with them, and I'm really grateful for the fact that they've stepped up into those roles. So the search approach that we're taking is very much focused on making sure that we have good searches for these as opposed to urgent searches, because we feel as though there is really great leadership in these roles right now. We're starting with the CTO. We have a job description out. We've begun reviewing candidates and applicants and moving that forward. The target for making an offer to someone is July, so in the beginning of the next fiscal year. We will start the other searches further down the line. So the VP of Talent and Culture will probably start after Wikipedia, that search, and then the Chief of Community Engagement, we're looking at really potentially as late as through September, beginning that. So staging this in such a way that we're focused on priorities for the organization and moving that forward. Following that, we had committed to delivering the strategy and the annual plan as 2 distinct goals. Delivery of the strategy, we do have a finalized strategy that is on MetaWiki. It is designed to last us about 18 to 24 months, really provide us guidance for this year's annual plan and next year's annual plan. We expect an permanent executive director to come in the fall, not have a whole lot of time to really get ramped up prior to beginning the annual planning process for next year. And so we wanted to give them sort of a clear set of goals and guidelines and strategic direction that we felt would be able to guide them through the next annual planning process and give them sort of the shape of that while they get to know the organization, while they get to know the movement. So the strategy is on MetaWiki. It is available for everyone to take a look at. It went through a process of community consultation and review. I think in the future, we'd love to make that a more inclusive sort of consultative process if we were to do that again. So then the annual plan is currently under review by the FDC. We posted that on April 1st. It has been open for comment. We received comments, I think it was at 42 different areas of comments from about 20 different individuals on Wiki, and then additional feedback at Wikimedia Conference Berlin from our colleagues in the affiliates. We're incorporating some of that feedback. We provided a updated version. We've made some updates on the annual plans page on MetaWiki and provided those to the FDC. We expect feedback from the FDC on Monday, the 16th, so next Monday, around the annual plan, and we'll look to incorporate that before providing a final version to the board in late May, early June for their approval prior to the close of the fiscal year, which is end of June, new fiscal year beginning on July 1st. So that's where we are on the annual plan. So the high level is that we are Our budget for this coming year is targeted around 63 million, which is 2 million less than the prior year's planning. And the number of staff, we're looking at 277 staff members, which is actually 3 headcount less than the last year's annual plan. The majority of our work is focused on program work. So I believe it is, I want to say 68% of our work is programmatic work, which means it is work that directly impacts our mission and works to advance that mission, whether it is in terms of engineering, performance, reliability, product development, or community support in terms of programs like our programs around the Wikipedia library, support and safety, or some of the work that the communications team is doing to advance and raise awareness of Wikipedia in the world, some of the work the partnerships team is doing around Wikipedia Zero. All of that constitutes programmatic work. The remaining work that is considered non-programmatic work is the work that allows all of that work to happen. So that is some of the work that the legal team does. That is some of the work that our finance and administration teams do to make sure that our books are balanced, to make sure that we're being transparent, make sure the advancement team, which includes fundraising, which does some really fantastic work. As we all know, making sure that we actually have, saw that done, making sure that we all have the resources to actually do the work and support the projects and support the community. So that is the annual plan. And as I said, we'll have more feedback on that on the 16th, and then we'll look to get that to the board for approval, ideally before Wikimania, but certainly by the end of June. And then finally, the last priority was around improving, addressing some of the critical results in the staff engagement survey. We ran a staff engagement survey in November of last year. It was very much a snapshot in time of the place that the organization was. We're running another engagement survey currently, although we will not have results until sort of early June. So that's a 6-month gap between the last one and the one that we're going to have results for in June. And we're really looking to see what has changed, what has improved, what are areas where we need to focus our energy and resources. We feel as though the last engagement survey was very much reflective of where the organization was at. And so while it is a valuable document and provides us valuable information, we're looking essentially to create a new baseline to see sort of how are we now, independent of the circumstances that existed in November, and then what are sort of the core issues for the organization to work on. In the interim period, we have been doing work to address some of the engagement survey results, which were around things like improved communication, improved sort of tone on in interactions, both with community, in public, like on mailing lists, within the organization, and so really working on creating spaces, safe places where people can have those conversations, where we can address issues before they sort of escalated. We're also looking at how do we improve the ability of people to give them the tools essentially to effectively manage some of their work and some of the teams so that they feel as though they were managing performance effectively within the organization. And I'm trying to think of, oh yes, the other 2 issues that came up were around alignment of the executive team and clarity around strategy from the executive director. And certainly the executive team, I think, is in a much better place. As I mentioned earlier, we've got great interim leadership. We're doing a lot more to share information from the organization, within the organization, posting notes from our weekly meetings, from our quarterly retreats, things like that, be present in a lot more meetings. And then the last one was around clarity of strategy and direction from the executive director. And I've personally been making, in addition to finalizing the annual plan and strategy, which I think was a request from many people within the organization, have personally been making an effort through venues like this to be more available and more present, to be able to answer. So I want to make sure that I'm pausing for a moment because I just talked for quite some time. And I'm going to take a sip of water, but I'm also going to see if there are any questions from folks who are in the room about anything that I just went over, or would like to hear, it doesn't have to be a question about specifics. It can also just be, could you talk a little bit about X, Y, or Z, about what's going on in the foundation, or, foundation relations and work with community, et cetera. So I'll pause for a minute. Do we have any questions?
We have one question.
Okay.
And also we should pause for there are currently 4 touch points here. So you have YouTube, you have Blue Jeans, you have IRC, and you have Etherpad. You can ask questions on any of them except YouTube, where you'll have to jump into one of our participatory channels. The one question we have in the Etherpad were, what were the key learnings / observations at WikiCon?
Yeah, that was a great question. So Wikimedia Conference was, from my perspective, was a, how do I put this into words? It was such a valuable, necessary moment, I think, for the foundation to come together with members of our community. I know that the affiliates represent some of our community, not all of it, but certainly a very important part of our community. And to hear from my perspective, to provide a venue for people to be able to speak to each other as equals, to each other as peers, discuss the way that some of the transition had affected them, and then think about, okay, once we are done sort of talking about transition, what are the things that we want to prioritize for the future? And one thing that I heard repeatedly from our affiliates was that they're was a very strong desire to participate and engage with a strategy around the future of the movement. The strategy that the Wikimedia Foundation presented at the beginning of April was one for the foundation. It was around, how do we allocate our resources? How do we think about our structure? How do we think about the work that we do? But it wasn't necessarily one that looks at the context of how that works within the broader movement, what the broader movement is trying to achieve. I think that's a very valuable conversation for us to have, and that should include, for example, from my perspective, a strategy for like an affiliate strategy, a strategy for growth, health, and leadership development within the community, a strategy around, or a perspective on what we should be doing in terms of like program support, for example. So these are some of the things that I heard very clearly at Wikimedia Conference was, we would like to start to see this, and there is some element of the dust still settling. I think there was a conversation on Wikimedia L very soon after the transition that said, oh great, now that that's all done, let's think about moving forward, and we're not quite, I mean, that was a very rapid response. I think within the foundation, the dust was still settling, and there are still some things that we're working out. But I think that the perspective on thinking about our future was something that came across loud and clear, and was something that I really appreciated, because I do personally feel as though, you know, the foundation is one part within an ecosystem. I know that we say that a lot, but I think that, you know, within the foundation, we feel that increasingly. And particularly through this transition, the ability to talk to our peers in other parts of the movement, learn from their experiences, have them as sounding boards, really sort of reinforced that perspective that we are sort of one part of this broader galaxy, I guess, if you will. So a strategy for the movement, participation in that, finding ways for the affiliates to have participation. One thing that came up was, and I think that this is really important, is we've been asking for a lot of feedback on the annual plan. Last year's annual plan was perhaps not presented in a way that gave community members sufficient time to give us feedback. It didn't give a lot of detail, and we really tried to address some of these criticisms this time around with providing more detail. We know that there are still things that we need to do, for example, to improve the way that we're able to track budgeting on a project or program basis, so that we can provide more clarity around some of those things, and we are working on that internally to be able to provide that. Goodness, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. So we're working to continue to provide that within, and what came across in, one of the things that I was asking for when we were in Berlin was that annual planning is actually incredibly important for the foundation, in particular, to receive a lot of feedback from community members, in part because when we lock that annual plan, we've committed to a set of actions and alignment of resources for the coming year. And what that means is that when we then hear from community members around priorities halfway through that year, it becomes very difficult for us to incorporate them in a dynamic way, in the sense of be responsive to that, because of the fact that we've committed to the annual plan. It's not impossible, but it does become more challenging. And so one of the things that that I think was a really important takeaway from Berlin is how do we get better feedback on that so that we can identify needs and expectations from community members, from affiliates, and then how do we prioritize those effectively. And so that was one thing that was a topic of conversation, was prioritization, super important, and something that we would really benefit from as an organization from community members is, what's not in here, what do people want to see, what should be represented, how should we prioritize, et cetera. So those were two big things. I think from my perspective, the biggest takeaway was really around sort of the interpersonal relationships, in the sense that even though there has been sort of a challenging period for the foundation, even though there are things that people would like to see from us and work that we can always continue to improve on, that there was actually a lot of support and a lot of desire to work together to move forward.
Great. So we have a second question. Again, this is a reminder that if you have questions, you can ask them on IRC or put them in the Etherpad, or if you're on Blue Jeans, you can ping them right here in the chat. The second question is, are there any plans to focus some resources on some of the less popular sister projects?
That is a great question. I had a really wonderful conversation when I was at a Wikimedia conference with Aubrey from the Wikisource user group. And so I think that one thing that we're hearing from within our teams is that there's a greater desire to integrate some of the product development and engineering work with some of the program work that community members and the community engagement team are doing. In the past, we feel as though those have been sort of parallel processes, and we've been very sort of focused on feature development for individual contributors or for readers in sort of an abstract sense, and we'd like to see a tighter integration there. And what that means is that I think that allows us the opportunity to say what sort of interesting programs are out there within the sister project that support or engage the sister projects, and how can we think about allocating resources to that. Two very obvious ones are around Wikidata. We are in, one very obvious one is around Wikidata. We're in conversations right now with Wikimedia Deutschland about how to best continue support for that and what sort of level of resourcing we, as an organization and as two organizations, are committed to there. And we expect to provide more information about that relatively soon in a more public setting around what we agree to. But some of the things that the Wikimedia Deutschland team, for example, are looking at is not just Wikidata, but how can Wikidata, the roadmap for this year, how can Wikidata be integrated into Commons in a way that is more effective, that actually will allow us to improve, for example, the discovery of media on Commons. That's this challenge that we often hear, is that Commons has incredible resources, but it's actually quite difficult to find it if you don't know what it is that you're looking for. And so Wikidata as a sister project, Commons as a sister project, by investing in one, we're actually investing in the other. And I think that that is really an exciting thing that I'm very excited about. Where I think it's a little bit, and I'm less clear on the specifics, and I apologize for this. I'm happy to look it up. But I believe that there also have been conversations about how Wikidata can support Wiktionary in ways that allow Wiktionary to continue to develop and grow and thrive. So those are three sister projects. And then conversations I think that I am interested in but have been less clear and we don't necessarily have commitments around are things like Wikisource is a very valuable resource, particularly within the GLAM community, and there's a lot of interest in it. It's a very different mode of contributing than editing Wikipedia, for example. What are ways that we can continue to develop that and develop community? And I think a lot of those conversations are sort of nascent at the moment. We had some of them over, the sort of dinner snack at Wikimedia Berlin over beers and sort of chatting, about what it is that we might like to see, but no sort of clear definitions there. From my perspective, I do think that, as the Wikimedia Foundation, the sister projects represent ways for us to continue to engage a broader audience, continue to advance our mission, represent ways for us to think more broadly about what contribution means and free knowledge means. And I would like to see us continue to be able to provide resources to it. I think the question will always be a question of what portion of resources, how do we do so in a way that makes sense within an integrated roadmap? What are things that we can do that support multiple projects as we continue to develop them in parallel? One thing that comes to mind as I'm talking is that, for example, the discovery team has been working on building out a mapping functionality for the projects, and they've actually been working with the big Wiki Voyage community to integrate that in, I believe it's every Wiki Voyage except for the Dutch Wiki Voyage. And so that mapping functionality now exists there. Now, eventually that will probably make its way to some of the Wikipedias, based on sort of community interest and further discussion. But I think that that's something that we're quite interested in, is how can we continue to develop in ways that support different projects that really think of us as more of an ecosystem than just sort of the individual Wikipedias. But again, it is always going to be a question of proportion. So some of this work is being done in sort of a pilot fashion, it's experimental, and admittedly there are just significantly more resources dedicated to Wikipedia. So I don't know if that answers that question, but certainly the sister projects, I think, are something that are very much in my mind around how do we think of ourselves a little bit more expansively. Any other questions?
That is the current set we have.
Okay.
Right now, we just got a great comment about putting the IRC and Etherpad links into the caption of the YouTube video.
That makes a lot of sense.
Is on that. So yeah, I guess this is a good time actually with the 11 participants on BlueJeans to just see if there are any questions over there or comments if anyone wants to chime in. And we will take 30 seconds of silence to be no.
A question for Greg, am I still oddly angled? Or is the camera still oddly angled? No, excellent.
That was actually, you missed that we figured out that was a BlueJeans bug. So I suppose my question was, why is it when I open the chat window in BlueJeans, does the video window not shrink proportionately correct to the chat window? But
yeah, that's weird.
The answer to that question, so.
That would be a great question for our BlueJeans customer rep.
I was going to say, it's too bad you can't just file a ticket in Fabricator, but that's the way that we develop things.
So yes, that was just that when I opened the chat window, it cut off half the camera, so that was my bad.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're working on the executive director transition process, and you've set up the committee, and you've set up a search, you've retained a search firm accordingly. And I'm wondering what we will be doing this time that is different from how we did it last time, or how we learned from how we did it the last time, and what will be different this time that will help ensure a more successful outcome.
So I will admit that that's somewhat of a difficult question for me to answer. I am not on the steering committee for the search. I've actually recused myself from that process, so I'm not as familiar with the conversations that are happening around that. I do know that some of the things that I've seen that I think are very positive indications are around increasing the level of consultation at the outset around what is it that we're looking for. So the steering committee held a meeting in Berlin, for example, that was open for anybody who wanted to attend to talk about what their priorities were, where they saw the needs, and a number of other sort of questions as well, just a very free-form discussion. I believe that there's going to be a similar conversation here at the Foundation for staff to participate in, and I know that the board is also looking for time within Wikimania to have that conversation as well. So some of that is being worked on. I think there are also conversations that are ongoing, and I don't have the specifics at this point about how to, for example, to survey or consult with the community prior to developing the job description around what some of those needs are that they see, that community members see for the permanent executive director. So a lot more consultation at the outset. And then in terms of the actual search itself, I'm not entirely certain how that process will work. I believe that it is going to be fairly straightforward as an executive search is concerned, in which we'll go out, the firm will work to identify strong possible candidates, and then they'll go through a candidate review process with interviews and the like. Whether or not there are opportunities there for greater participation and transparency, I think that's a challenging thing to solve for, and that is mostly related to the fact that searches to some extent contain confidential information. Candidates often prefer to their participation in the process to be confidential, and so of course, how do you effectively bring people into that process without sort of creating tensions around that confidentiality? So far to date, I think that some of the things that have happened within the ED search steering committee have been really effective. We're having somebody from staff in the search committee in addition to an executive from the staff. The presence of staff on the committee is consistent with the last time round, but having staff select that person, opening up for feedback from community members at different points along the way, different types of community as well, because we all know that there are very different perspectives that are represented across the community. I think we're looking at how might we be able to actually, if we are going to do a survey or consultation, make that available in the largest number of languages possible, because of course we want to make sure we're not just listening to people who have a fluent command of English. We want to make sure we're listening to others as well. So those are some of the things that are happening currently, and I'll say that I'm very confident in the search committee. I think they're going to do an excellent job, but I don't necessarily have a ton of specifics on how precisely they're going to run it so it leads to a really successful outcome, or what those specific differences are. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions?
I have an entirely self-serving question about when and if we would stock Club Mate at the foundation.
Oh yeah, ooh, Club Mate at the foundation. That is a very good question. You would like some Club Mate? You had too much fun in Berlin. Club Mate, for those, I'm sure everyone is familiar, but for those who don't know, is a highly caffeinated German beverage, very much beloved in the hacker community. I don't know that I hear it's very difficult to get Club Mate in the United States, that you have to have a special guy who does your importing. So that might be a challenge, but I strongly recommend opening a ticket with the facilities team, and maybe they can look into it.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question here, which is, I haven't seen much on long-term technical media wiki strategy in a while. Is that being worked on / planned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the fact that we have somebody from the architecture committee here in the room who can sort of help with this. So there are some really good questions. There are some questions that we have out there about the long-term thinking for MediaWiki and our underlying architecture. There's some things that I think are moving forward sort of as a natural evolution of our organization. And then there are some things that are questions that we're looking to resolve that we see as really important. So some of the things that I think are interesting, and Rob, please by all means jump in, is that the foundation is taking a look at our sort of service architecture and what it is that we can be doing potentially, and if we should be moving towards more of a service-based architecture within, so that we can support essentially a greater degree of sort of flexibility and consistency around the development of features, around being able to develop on different devices or platforms, for example, using a sort of consistent underlying code, essentially. And so those are the sort of things that I think are sort of natural process-based evolution around we're grappling with questions on a day-to-day basis, and we have to make decisions. And as we go into annual planning, we're thinking a little bit about what it is that we want to plan for and resource. Around some of the questions around things like MediaWiki Core, those are questions that are outstanding, and to some extent we've said we actually are looking for we're engaged in the CTO search, and we are going to continue to have some of these conversations, but we're also expecting that a CTO is going to come in and be a valuable voice in those conversations. So some of them, I don't want to say that they're on hold, but I think that we are comfortable with the fact that some of these timelines are going to be just a little bit longer while we have some critical open positions. So, but I will actually let Rob speak to some of the, if there's specifics that you would like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Thanks for being here.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think that a lot of what we're doing right now is the same sort of development that we've done for years, which is we discuss how things should be put together on our mailing lists out in the community. We work together on trying to have a consensus-based approach to figure out what the right forward-looking architecture should be. And so a lot of the conversations, like for example, about services are definitely conversations. There are pieces that we want to figure out, like how quickly we should move from one thing to another and how we should move from one thing to another. And certainly,
Did the room just drop out?
It did. I had like
Alright, I'll just
a
ping you. I'll
question
ping Brendan.
like ready.
We're probably still recording, so just feel free to.
Oh Jesus, it's my face on YouTube. Hi guys. Hi YouTubers. Hello, this is the voice
Hello.
of God. Well,
So for the NSA and everyone else who will watch this later.
well, I'm happy to take any questions since I seem to be the only representative still still
probably the
here.
most-
No
No
worries,
worries
Brendan.
at all. Take your time. So it's 20 to 2 here, in case you're wondering why I sound kind of tired. Seddon, you're looking awfully sprightly for somebody up at 2 a.m.
Well, as much of advancement can testify, I also don't sleep. So I think it's a fairly standard thing.
Yeah, I think
Liam
so.
Wyatt is trolling me personally.
All right. Hello and
You're
welcome
back.
back.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. We had a reset of our devices here. So we were talking a little bit about some of the architecture decisions, and I don't know, Rob, do you mind just repeating sort of towards the end, because I'm not sure exactly at what point we froze and dropped out.
yeah, so in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is come up with a consensus-based view of our architecture, working together, not just with Wikimedia Foundation employees, but with the engineering community throughout the world, and working together to work with the goal to come up with a consensus-based view of what our architecture should be and provide consensus-based leadership on that.
Yeah, and I think I'm just looking at the specific language of the question, which is I haven't seen much on long-term technical strategy in a while. And do you have thoughts, Rob, on why people might feel that way? Is it because we had to sort of put things on it? Because I'm sure that there has been work that's been being done, but is it because people maybe are less aware of sort of the channels of conversation where it's happening? Is it because perhaps we did put things on pause as we were going through this transitional period? I'm curious from your perspective why that might be something that people feel.
Yeah, it's always
put you on the spot. Because
right,
I know
no,
the
it's 'cause
architecture committee itself has just recently gone through sort of a formalization, for example, and that's great progress.
Yeah, I think that's certainly like one of the things I've been focused on in the this calendar year has been about making the architecture committee a place that people know to go to get clarity on future direction. And just to give an example, this also relates to the sister projects. We have one of our regular our IRC office hour meetings where we talked about the InterWiki map and the work that the Wikidata folks want to. Actually, it's not just the Wikidata folks. It's a combination of all of us trying to figure out how we should do InterWiki links in a much smarter way than we've been doing them before. But this is still a nascent conversation. I can give a link to that in the IRC channel. In short, though, a lot of the conversation is about how, when we have so many people, it's in some ways the same problem that we have in building Wikipedia, for example, that, why haven't we done Wikipedia 1.0? Well, it's complicated. There's so many people working together on this, and which section needs more work? Well, we've got, a few million articles, so it depends.
Right. Thanks. I hope that answers the question of whoever asked that. I love the fact that it's anonymous. But apologies because I can't actually directly answer your question. So, are there any other questions?
We do have another question. Again, this is a reminder for those joining on YouTube or Blue Jeans, wherever you may be. We're taking questions from the Blue Jean chat window from IRC, and we are adding them to an Ethernet pad that we are sharing them to stack the questions. So the question we have next is, do we have a solid understanding of whether or not Wikipedia is growing or shrinking?
Yeah, how do we, I guess there's so many different facets of that, that's hard to think about how to answer, right? In the sense of Wikipedia as, if we think of Wikipedia as, okay, it's the encyclopedia, it's the roughly 300 Wikipedias, of which roughly 60% are active, healthy, viable communities. Yes, Wikipedia is growing. New Wikipedias are being born. I think there were 3 in the last year or so, or at least since I've been at the foundation, that have made their way out of incubator into the world, which is fantastic. So the idea of Wikipedia seems to be growing. The size of Wikipedia is continuously growing. There are more articles every day. We see that across the projects, not just on English Wikipedia, where I think lots of people often pull sort of the hard statistics, but just last quarter, I think there was this huge burst of editing activity on I think it was bot-based on Swedish Wikipedia, and just grew very significantly. So Wikipedia in terms of article size is growing. Wikipedia in terms of byte size is growing. If we're looking at things like readership, for example, yes, I think that there's sort of this interesting question around how do we measure whether or not our readership numbers are staying consistent. And what we can say there is that we've recently moved to a new means of measurement to understand the level of traffic, not just page views, but actually unique devices, which is a new measurement that we've introduced over the course of the last couple months, which allows us to say, okay, I think in this last month we had more than 500 million unique devices that came to Wikipedia. We don't have a year-on-year way to actually go back and sort of compare that data with previous data. So we were on ComScore for a long time, and that gave us a sort of an estimate of how many unique users we had. Then we decided that ComScore wasn't really reflective of the full scope of of readership, in the sense of it didn't necessarily account for mobile devices effectively outside of North America. And we felt like it was missing some things, and so we decided to move off ComScore, which meant we went from looking at unique users into looking at other metrics, where we started to look at page views, for example. but that's not directly comparable to unique users. And then we've moved into unique devices. So we've had a couple different sets of metrics, and we don't have the ability to go back and retroactively say, all right, longitudinally, what are the trends here? We will get to that point with the unique device data set, because ultimately over time, we'll be able to have sort of data from months past, and we can say, okay, this looks like seasonality, or this looks like something else, or this is something we should pay attention to. One very interesting insight that I know that the readership team is exploring is, all right, now we know that page views, for example, may be declining, but it looks like the unique devices are not necessarily declining. And so what does that say? Is that a reflection of the transition over to mobile as more and more users use us on mobile? There was a great study that just came out done by the Knight Foundation that was in the press today, talking about how, even with some of these considerations or concerns that we may have around our traffic and whether readers are still using us in the same way that they used to on desktop, we remain one of the most popular sites, one of the most used sites in the world on mobile, and much more so than any of sort of our nearest. I don't want to say runners up. That's not the right term, but sort of any of the other ones that we were compared to. So we looked at CNN, or the study by Knight Foundation looked at CNN, it looked at BuzzFeed, and we were by far and away significantly more used. I think the average was about 10 minutes a month on Wikipedia for your average user on mobile, which is much higher than almost anything else. Of course, it's less than social networks like Facebook, but we're a very different type. We have a very different role within the digital ecosystem. So I think that, as for the question of are we growing or shrinking, certainly the size of Wikipedia is growing, the diversity of languages continues to grow. In terms of readership, it's not clear to us yet, simply because I think we're still looking for some of those. We don't have that trend line data in terms of the metrics, but I think that the data that we do have shows that we remain incredibly healthy. And then in terms of the editing community, we know that the number of highly active editors has stabilized. I think that we do still have a very strong interest in ensuring that the editing community continues to grow and become healthy, not become healthy, stays healthy, and that we find ways to diversify the editing community. So, I mean, if you were to sort of pin me to a wall and say, are we growing? Do we know if we're growing? I would say yes, and by and large, I think we're in a healthy place, but the challenge for us is always to continue to challenge ourselves to become healthier, challenge ourselves to be more relevant to more people, challenge ourselves to make sure that we're engaging all the people that we could possibly engage and finding avenues for them to have a relationship with our movement.
We have two questions in the stack right now, a question from IRC and a question from Seb. I'll take the question from IRC first. I take it from the draft annual plan that the WMF are planning to raise $63 million next fiscal, which is slightly lower than the 72 USD actually raised in donations and contributions in 2015. Do you think we have reached a peak in terms of fundraising, or what was last year unexpectedly successful? Or are you trying to keep fundraising lower on purpose, e.g. to avoid lengthy banner campaigns? Any thoughts?
So some of the ways that we understand that our fundraising is shifting, and I'm delighted that Seden's on the call, and I may ask you to jump in. In fact, I do ask you to jump in if I misspeak. But what we know, for example, is that the average donation on the websites, based on the banners that we run, is around $15. We know that the average donation on mobile is around $5, I believe, and the average donation via email is closer to $30. As I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about whether Wikipedia is growing or shrinking, increasingly our traffic is moving to mobile. So we're just seeing differences in terms of the way that people engage with our fundraising campaigns. There's a lot of thoughts as to why fundraising is smaller dollar donations on mobile phones that have nothing to do with us per se. Those are trends within sort of mobile engagement at large. People shop less on mobile phones. They tend to not make important decisions on mobile phones. They still tend to use desktop for all of these things. These are trends across the industry. They're not trends that are specific to us. Certainly it's helpful that we can learn from them. But so we're seeing smaller donations on mobile phones. I think, in fact, the fact that we are continuing to be able to, our model for small dollar donations continues to be effective is a real testament to how powerful how much our projects mean to the world. And I think now that we sort of have a better sense of the segmentation, in large part because the advancement team continues to do phenomenal work to understand our users and really is invested in understanding some of these trends, we will be able to think about how do we make up some of these gaps, improve some of this performance, for example. So I don't know that I would certainly not be comfortable saying that we've hit our peak. I think the better, from my perspective, the question that I would want to ask is, what size should we be in order to effectively achieve our mission? And right now, I think we're looking at the projection of $63 million as a revenue target, and we're saying, okay, that's a little bit less than last year. For context, we often budget conservatively around our revenue targets because we feel as though we have an obligation to do so as a responsible institution, so that when we're building our annual plan and annual budget, I know this sounds like a very obvious thing to say, but it's actually very important that we're not budgeting for things where we don't expect that we're going to have revenue to support them. So we budget a little bit conservatively. So this year we budgeted for, this past year we budgeted for 65 million, and we currently are at around, I want to say 70 million in terms of overall revenue. So we've exceeded our targets a little bit. We may well exceed our target again next year, but we just want to be a little conservative while we continue to work to understand these trends. That was part one of the question, was around, did we meet our peak? There was a second part to the question. Do you mind reminding me?
So that was the question. The second part was, are we trying to keep fundraising lower on purpose?
Right.
E.g. to avoid lengthy banner campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we always want to make sure that we are not, that we're striking a balance of raising the resources that we need in order to be able to continue to work towards advancing our mission and supporting our programs and respecting our users. I mean, we deliberately, I think that there's a sort of a principle within the fundraising team about minimizing the disruption to users, and that has long been a principle that that team has adhered to. We have become better and better and better at that, at understanding, what are the things that are effective, what are the things that minimize the duration of the campaign, how long do we want to run these banners, how do we make sure that we're not showing them to people after a certain number of visits. But the banners themselves, I think it's important to note, are actually one of the very few times that we have the opportunity to convey to the world that we are a nonprofit movement, that we are a non-commercial movement, that the WMF is a nonprofit organization. And we often do hear that in feedback from donors, is that they may not have realized that until they saw that banner and until they read that text. So I do think that, well, there is sort of a trade-off around, we definitely want to minimize the nuisance to readers and make sure that if there are people who simply are not going to be supporters in a financial sense, that's okay for a variety of reasons. I wouldn't expect a 13-year-old to give us our allowance money, although we have had that, and that's an incredibly special testament to the importance of the projects. And then there are people who access us in places in the world where they would not be able to contribute, whether because of sort of limitations on their actual ability to make a payment, or limitations because of currency exchange, and that's okay too. Like, we exist to be free for the world. But so there's sort of the nuisance factor there, but there's also an opportunity for us to make sure that we're communicating who we are, what we stand for, what our mission is, what our values are, and I think that that is something that the fundraising team is really sort of cognizant of and is thinking about, is always an opportunity that we can continue to work to be better at. But Seddon, I want to make sure that I didn't misrepresent any of the work that the team is doing. Do you have anything that you would like to add?
No, I think you've summed it up pretty well. Yes, there are changes in the balance in terms of where we get our fundraising from in terms of its sources. You alluded to the migration from desktop to mobile, and the mobile payments environment is not as mature as it is on desktop, and I think that it is improving with time, and maybe that will benefit us. But obviously, we need to get smarter at how we're doing that. Email is becoming very important for us. We doubled our email income last year, thanks to some of the fantastic work by Caitlin Cogdill, and really that was the first year where we had someone who was, really dedicated to improving, utilizing a resource and a donor database that is growing year on year. But obviously, there are considerations to do with the fact that we will be receiving less donations through the banners year to year, we think. So yeah, whether it's peak fundraising, we don't know. I think we need to get better and smarter at it. And I think that there's still room for improvement. And also, we've started additional work in terms of, setting up the endowment fund for the movement. And, in time that may provide another stream, revenue stream for us. But I think we're doing well. We're healthy financially. We're healthy, and I don't think that there's not going to be a sudden drop off of donations that we're going to find ourselves in 12 months' time with no money. That is not going to be the case. So yeah, I think that you gave a good answer. So.
I think the endowment, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I'm very excited about it. I think the endowment is something that I really like to think about because the language of the endowment is that we're going to support the projects in perpetuity. And to me, that is as inspiring a call to action as our vision statement itself, right? If our vision statement is reach everybody in the world so they can freely share in the sum of all knowledge, those are some really big aspirational goals there. The endowment is support the projects in perpetuity, and that is a big aspirational goal as well. It means that we want to be around forever in some shape or form that is meaningful in terms of our mission. And I think that that is a call to action in and of itself. One thing that I would just add in terms of thinking about the endowment as a revenue stream is that, from my perspective, it's not a revenue stream so much as something that will allow us to make good decisions as we continue to grow and mature, and will help us think of ourselves sort of in that longer arc and horizon of development. I believe, and I definitely said, and correct me here on this one, that, for example, we would not even begin to look at revenue from the endowment until it was fully funded. And the timeline for that being fully funded is about 10 years out in order to, is that correct? I know there was a conversation.
So it's a 10-year plan for those people who don't really have a good understanding in terms of how endowments work. Endowments is a long-term investment in terms of building up that fund, and is something that exponentially grows with time. So the longer you leave it, the bigger that endowment builds up as people make commitments to that endowment fund. So it is definitely a long-term safety net in some ways to protect the movement, to protect the long-term survivability of the movement, rather than it's not a short-term gain. It's looking far into the future.
Thank you. Do you have other questions?
So we are at time, but
we are.
I wanted to leave a moment here for Seddon to ask his question. And I also wanted to note that the comments in the Blue Jeans chat, we will be collecting those, and Catherine can look into those as well and respond to those after this conversation. As I look through our channels, the IRC, I see no additional comments at this time. So Seddon, your question is the last question, and then all of these notes that are in the Etherpad will be available on Meta, as well as a link to the recording of the video. Seddon, over to you.
Cool. So I'm taking off my staff hat for a moment and putting on sort of my affiliate background. And the question I wanted to ask is, so your background is from multinational organizations, whether that's for-profit or non-profit, and I wanted to ask how that influences your view of the affiliates in comparison to your predecessors.
Well, I can't speak to my predecessors because they're not here to speak for themselves, right? What I would say is that Seddon is correct. My background was in a variety of organizations, primarily nonprofit organizations, in which we had structures that often included a global headquarters and then country offices or country presences. which is it comes from the world of international development, so global development around healthcare, for example, or education. The affiliates are different than that in the sense that they are not they're not representatives of headquarters out there in the world. They are independent organizations. They develop their own annual planning, and they have yeah, I mean, they're independent organizations, and I think that that is entirely appropriate. What I would say that my belief is that the affiliates represent a tremendous opportunity for us in terms of expanding our mission to more people, and doing so in a way that is effective to the communities that we serve and exist within. So from the foundation, so as in my role previously as the chief of communications, we spent a lot of time working with affiliate organizations and our counterparts in affiliates on thinking about how do we engage and reflect some of our messaging and priorities and goals and campaigns locally in those countries and in those contexts. Because sitting in San Francisco, I just simply don't have the context to know what is going to be meaningful around, for example, a birthday celebration in Lagos. I would love to. I've been to Lagos. It's a beautiful city, a lot of fun, great people, but very different contexts, very different challenges, and our affiliates understand that better than we do. And that, so I mean that, for example, I use Nigeria as an example that I reckon, that's a user group. It's a smaller organization. It's a volunteer-based organization. I think for the affiliates that are professionalized chapters, the opportunity sets are very different in terms of the amount of resources and dedicated resources that are there. I think personally, my sort of takeaway on the affiliates is that I see huge opportunity. I see it as a place where we could continue to think about what the affiliates offer that will allow us to strengthen our connection in to people, the people that we serve, the people that we want to reach, the people who we want to become a part of our movement or to be, advocates or supporters of our movement, in ways that are appropriate to them, in ways that make reference to their own cultural touch points, in ways that speak their language. And so from my perspective, I'm very much looking forward to working with affiliates over the course of the next few months. I was really thrilled during Wikimedia Conference in Berlin to have the chance to sit down with the executive directors of the staffed affiliates and learn from them some of the things that they're doing, and have made the commitment to join them on their regular calls, which happen, I think, on an every 6-week basis in order to understand some of their priorities and needs. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to support the movement. And so there's a lot that we have that we can learn from each other. And there's a lot that I can learn from, I personally can learn from the ways that the affiliates are supporting their communities or the relationships that they have or the challenges that they've had. And I recognize the affiliates, as I said earlier, are one part of a broader ecosystem. So they play a role within our movement. There are also people who choose not to become involved with the affiliates, or places where there is no affiliate that represents our contributors. And so we need to respect all those different aspects and all those different experiences. But I definitely think that the affiliates are somewhere where I would love to think in partnership with affiliate leadership and around what value and role can affiliates continue to play as we move forward. So, and I'm very interested in, I know that AFCOM is thinking about this. I'm very interested in some of their thoughts as well. We had a really good conversation in Berlin. So I don't know if I hope that answers your question, Sutton.
Good.
Y'all, thank you so much for joining us for these open hours. For the folks that joined us on Blue Jeans, thanks for the questions and comments in the chat. For the folks that had things on IRC, those are terrific as well. Again, these will be documented and published to Meta. Big shout out and thank you to Greg Varnum for taking the lead there on getting this documented. And Brendan, thank you for setting up this call.
Yeah, may I just say thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who participated. I really appreciate your presence and your questions. And for those who didn't ask questions, I just appreciate you giving me the opportunity, or giving me the opportunity to speak and for listening. I keep looking at my computer. It's because I've got one eye on IRC, and I'm curious what folks are chatting about there. And I will be doing another office hours in a short period of time on IRC, which is a very different dynamic. It's a little bit more fast and loose, and I think it'll be really fun. Like, I love IRC myself, so I'm looking forward to that. And I want to thank in particular everybody who made this possible from the foundation side in terms of setting it up. I know it's everyone in this room, and I'm going to call out also Sebin and Rabla for being available to answer questions in greater detail than I was able to, so thank you. All right, thanks all. Bye.
Take care all. Bye.
Recording has stopped.
Zach, do you have the chat log copied down, or
The IRC log?
from Blue Jeans?
No, I did not.
Don't think this saves, so I'll go ahead and copy this.
Copy and pasted it real quick, but if there's a more like official way as the moderator to save, that would be great. Just the copy and paste.
Well, I'll look into that. I don't think Jeans saves chat logs, but I can look into that.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I did do a quick copy and paste just so we have it, and then I'll do a copy and paste of the IRC one, and then get the Etherpad stuff posted. Oh, also, we're apparently still turned on YouTube, I'm being told.
Oh.
All right.
Bye, YouTube. Bye, YouTube.